First up, I'd like to invite our session moderator, who in fact is none other than Mr. Manish Gulati of MOFA Studio, New Delhi. And under his leadership, MOFA has also won close to 50 international national design awards, special mentions, as well as competitions. And this evening, he's going to be responsible to extract the perspectives from our speakers. So first up, I'd like to invite Mr. Manish Gulati. And joining him on the stage, I'd like to now also invite our panel members, Mr. Vivek Bole of Neo Modern Architects, Mumbai. May I also invite Mr. Shantanu Poredi from Mobile Offices, Mr. Vishwanath Kashikar from Sept Ahmedabad, Mr. Abhigyan Niyogi of Chrome Design Studio, and Mr. Vishal Raman, acclaimed filmmaker. So I'm going to be requesting our session moderator, Mr. Manish Gulati, to also introduce our panel members and introduce the session as well.
Thanks for that introduction, although I was supposed to do the introduction for all the panel members, but that's okay. I think there is a certain way in which we're going to go about this discussion, and my introduction to all of these members, there is a certain sequence or a narrative or a spectrum that we built up when we say psyche of space making. So the whole panel comprises of these 5 gentlemen. I would start with Vishwanath Kashikar, who comes from an academic background. He's a senior professor at Sept Ahmedabad at School of Architecture. Somebody who's dealt with theories of architecture for years, germinating that seed of the pure practice of how it is from the point of view of how to formulate those ideas in the minds of the students. I have Shantanu Poredi, who is an academician and a practicing architect in Mumbai with his practice Mobile Offices, who has also been teaching and has been applying those theories of architecture into his practice and vice versa. Vivek Bole here, who is a practicing architect in Mumbai again, who is an expert in working on projects which are public space projects, real estate projects, doing mass housings, malls, and spaces that kind of transform psyches at an urban level. Then I have Abhigyan Niyogi, who's pretty much doing close to more than 40, 45 restaurants at this point in time, and an expert who is dealing with spaces of public interaction, places where we go and eat, spend our time. He's breaking grounds there in terms of formulating those psyches. And the 5th member I have here is Vishal Raman, who has been, he's a multifaceted guy who did his architecture, and he moved on to filmmaking. Guy who's worked with people like Sanjay Leela Bhansali and Vidhu Vinod Chopra, and worked on movies like Kai Po Che, Ram Leela, and even Bajirao Mastani. Now, the whole understanding of this, what is the psyche of space making? How do we perceive space? Does the space talk to us? Does it create an impact in certain manner? What do people take back? Is it the psyche of a designer? Is it the psyche of the client? Is it the psyche of the user by the end of the day? What formulates all of this together? There is a certain narrative that a designer creates versus there's a narrative that is given to a designer who interprets that space. So there are all these questions, and in all of these factors, we result into a space making which ultimately impacts somebody who experiences it. Somebody who experiences a piece of architecture, takes those subtle hints from there, those underlying texts, those subtexts, and tries to understand where that space came about from, versus somebody who creates a movie and in those 3 hours creates that impact, that visual extravaganza in the minds of the people who watch it, and they take back a certain set of predetermined markers which also create a certain psyche. And all of these combined together are forming a certain thinking in the minds of people who are, in the end, going and perceiving spaces in a different way. So I'm going to kick off this discussion, and before that, guys, I have a buzzer here, so we are only 1 hour. So anybody I feel is going a little overboard, a little emotional and romantic about what they're talking about, I'm going to press the buzzer and you have to shift the mic to the next guy. So I'll start with Vishwanath here. And so as an academician, Vishwanath, you have kind of seen the purest form of practice, and you deal with that, the theory of architecture, dealing with students who have yet not got an idea of architecture is, you create those seeds of it, and you create the psyches at the foundation level. So when you are teaching and when you're going into this whole understanding, do you start identifying different psyches across the gamut of the students that you're working with, and you can kind of predict? Because by the end of the day, the school that we choose or the office we choose to do internship as students, it pretty much kind of formulates the career that we are going to pursue in a broad sense, rather, I mean, unless there are certain turnarounds that happen in your life. So are you able to identify those seeds, those points in your teaching itself, and you can kind of predict that, okay, these students are going to go in a certain way, practicing architecture, and, what is the direction? So what is that methodology here?
Well, I wouldn't say that as teachers we plant seeds or that we formulate the psyche of the student. In fact, when students come into first year, we see that there is a lot of variation amongst the students. Some coming from a very urban background, some coming from a very rural background. And that is one set of things which governs the way they react to situations. The other, of course, is also the immediate events that are going on in their life. And that also starts affecting the way they deal with the design problem. So yes, I do see that when the student actually has to put paper on pencil on paper, when that blank cartridge or that tracing is staring in front of them, there's a lot of nervousness. And I think that nervousness remains in students a lot of times till even they graduate. I presume even when they are practicing as architects. And for me, when I'm teaching, I'm always looking at how to not remove that, because I think that's not possible, but how to ease that process of translating what is in your mind onto paper. And yes, different students do take on different trajectories, but also I don't think it's a singular sort of path which they traverse. There are times, I mean, even when I was a student, there were students who would just design on the last day, and there would be students who would be worrying throughout the semester, trying to grapple with the design project, and all their angst and worries would come out on paper. So yes, I do think that the mindset of the designer plays a huge role in the kind of designs that come out. And I would just like to add that unfortunately, when we are discussing architecture, we are always discussing it as the end product. We are discussing what we see, but we rarely talk about the mindset of the person who is designing and how that starts affecting the kind of spaces that they make.
Great. So I'll move on to Shantanu. Being a practicing architect and somebody who's been teaching for more than 18 years now, rather 20 years now, we have grappled with this thought a lot of times that architecture as a profession is a very neutral profession, and architects start afresh with every idea and everything. And we all know in the practice that there is nothing neutral about our thinking. There are predisposed ideas already. I mean, even if I talk about your SPA campus at Vijayawada, or the exhibition that you did recently, which is,
Amazing.
It's
amazing.
The amazing exhibition, where you've got these subtle hints into something that may have formulated, something that you may have picked up, some visuals that come in, and that is one part of it. You have a certain idea, but then there is a client side to it. You're dealing with SPA Vijayawada, and I believe your client, who's also a landscape architect by profession, there is a certain psyche that comes across into that. And there is a kind of a struggle that one goes through in grappling with that, because there is an idea what you want to put forward, how people are going to use that space ultimately. But ultimately, it becomes like a mix of these two, and that struggle of creating that and ultimately directing it to a certain level of what you want, or that first image that you have. How do you go about doing that?
I think there's two different kinds of projects in this. The SPA Vijayawada project was a competition So we drew it the way we thought the campus should operate. It is a very dense campus on a 7-acre plot. We are building, let's say, 500,000 square feet. So at the level of the competition, we challenged it with, they had single rooms for students. And people would, if you just looked at the mathematics of it, you would reach somewhere like 14 stories. And if we got it down to double rooms, you could get it down to a more sort of humane scale. So I think at that level. But once you've done the competition, you have to build it, the client faces you. You meet architects who are your client. They're all architects. And that's when this happens, that there is a landscape architect who wants to do the landscape because they're also architects. And how do you really negotiate this? And it is tough. It is tough because practicing architects would, academicians would feel that there is this purest way of dealing with landscape. But there is also other aspects of the architecture that is very important. And the struggle is something that we've had to sort of deal with because it is, also a certain respect for a client that you need to gain. I mean, you need to sort of build that respect because you believe what you've done because you won a competition and you believe that's the only way of looking at a project. So I think this negotiation over the past few years has been difficult, but it's also a learning. And I think we've learned a lot out of it. On the other side, if you look at the project like Amazing, where a client gave you a brief that he wanted a maze in the Jahangir Art Gallery, just go and give me a narrative. And we made a narrative for him how a maze could function. So we were using principles of loss of space, which is a very theoretical idea that people like Rem and all were using to get lost within space. So if you lose dimension of the wall and they become spaces, you really, as an architect, would never know where you are. So you lose reference of space. And again, this is something that there's this preoccupation we've always had with MC Escher's work, where we always are kind of disillusioned or you don't know references and you get lost within that palette itself of Escher. So this is a subconscious condition, but it becomes kind of, later on you start realizing it's because you've been training yourself to these kind of influences. You've liked that work, you don't know what you liked about it, but you've been looking at MC Escher's work or perhaps even Piranesi's work. So these subconsciously have started coming into your work. We've never realized it, but since we are talking about it today, we've realized that these are influences and they do occur in our projects. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, we are going to have this discussion, but one by one, I will now go to Vivek, who is dealing with creating of public spaces in Mumbai and pretty much all over India, and doing projects which range from dealing with the psyches of a developer in terms of creating mass housings where there is no fixed client, there is no given narrative. You develop a kind of an image for the city at an urban level. There's a certain building that stands in the middle of Mumbai and it affects the entire urban psyche out there. You're dealing at a much larger scale of not dealing one-to-one in terms of understanding whether it's the client. You're ultimately looking at something that by the end of the day, I mean, and we cannot deny that fact that a developer who has the best intention of doing a project, there are commercial numbers involved into it. There are all kinds of calculations involved into it, right from FSIs to financial feasibility, sustainabilities. In that entire kind of obstacle maze, still to kind of come to a level to create that image for the city or to create a house which anybody can relate to, it's a complex exercise. To emotionally connect it with somebody who wants to buy a 2-bedroom house, how does that aspiration get fulfilled from that point to this point? So, that is something that I would like you to elaborate on.
See, if I answer your question, we'll drift away from the subject. So I'll start with something else. First 3 years of my career, I did only architecture. And it was told, in fact, it is always discussed that architecture, interior design, and urban planning are 3 different subjects. And the units are different. Like the architect works in feet and meter and square feet and square meter. Whereas in interior design, you deal in Sud, Dora, millimeters, inches, part of inches. And when it comes to urban planning or urban design, then the scale increases. You talk about acres and kilometers. But then the common factor is space. So we adopted 3D technology much before. Right from '93, I was working on various digital 3D softwares. So I came to know that there is one very unique and common factor, that is space, and what you need to take care. If you want to do practice in all three, see, it is very difficult for any professional to be successful in all these three subjects simultaneously. So I think the common factor is basically designing a space which is first perceptible. Unless you understand the space, unless you can read the form. Okay, see, interior is like you are looking at a form from inside. Whereas when it comes to architecture, you're looking at it from outside. When you talk about urban design, urban planning, public space, you are looking at bunch of forms from somewhere. So when you make the form perceptible, a cube is a perceptible form. A cuboid is an evolution, is an evolution of the cube. So you are not actually losing the identity of the form and you are utilizing it. And unless you make it real, understandable, it is like I talk to you in some Italian language, I give you a poem in Italian, you don't understand, you won't be able to enjoy the lyrics of it, whatever good it may be. So understanding a form, a basic form, and then you keep the evolution, you use the composition of different forms, and you generate a space. And this one definition is common for all the three subjects. So once I learned this technique, and then the scale was different. So I started doing interior design, and we started designing the urban spaces. Your question was like, what happens to the psyche of the client? Let's not discuss about the psyche of the client. They don't know what they want. Particularly, whenever we design spaces, we have to always look at the psychology of the user, of the viewer, how he is going to feel, what kind of character he's perceiving. Like a hospital, he has got some preconceived idea. He has got some stereotype character in mind. You cannot design a restaurant and call it a hospital, or vice versa. It would be something like you wear a Bermuda with a batik shirt and you go for a business meeting. It won't work, you know. We have got certain notions. So something similar is there for architecture as well as for interiors, you know. So designing spaces is for the user, not for anybody else, not for architect. Architect will keep on satisfying their egos. That will not work.
You said a very interesting point. A restaurant cannot be designed as a hospital. And I have somebody who's specializing in restaurants and breaking all norms in creating all kinds of restaurants. So looking at recent works of Abhigyan, who's done Social Nehru Place, he's done Social Cyber Hub as a chawl in Mumbai. He's done Prankster, which is pretty much like a college campus with inverted kind of elements. So there is an exercise in design or space making that's happening simultaneously when you talk about something like this, an architect's ego. There is somebody who's sitting with here, and I would like to ask Abhigyan on that point itself, that you lie on the brink of space making and object placement. So there is a conscious effort of placing those certain markers or objects in the space that you create. There's an underlying background that you create, which maybe which is of course the mainline narrative. But then you also leave in the exact clues and the markers in those space, which may be temporary in nature, which may not come into that theoretical architectural norms as we talk about it. They are just influences which directly hit the psyches of the users. In your case, especially, doing these fast-track projects, and I know restaurants don't go more than 45 to 60 days gestation period of making it and creating and giving it to the public. You are dealing with complex equations of what your client is looking for, and you've got clients who are pretty much in this industry for a very long time, and they know what they want exactly, right from food to the space. To weave in your narrative into that whole thing, how do you go about doing that?
So basically, I would say that we are imaginist. Someone in this entire broad scheme of thing have to have a vision or a goal. So firstly, if someone approaches us that let's do a project, he will expect us to come with a vision or a dream. So we would be imaginist, I'd call it artist, anything. The first role is to create the dream and then bounce it off to multiple people as ideas. So for example, when we were building CyberHub Social, it was built in a very concrete structure and we wanted to do an urban habitation in a different form in Gurgaon. So that's why we built a social that looks like a chawl. So when we bounced the idea, there were like 6 people sitting on the table, out of which 5 said, "Pagal ho gaya kya? Matlab, this is not even possible. And how is this relevant to what you want to do?" So then I said that it's relevant to a lot of sense that this is what I want to communicate as an idea, and I'm using your platform to express myself. So someone has to trust you to give you the trust that yes, he'll give you a platform and you can express an idea. And then you negotiate through very fine lines of defining what you want to do. In the end, it has to make money to the client, and the client has to earn a lot of money, and it has to influence your guests who are coming there. And you set like a preset or a pattern of a new way of thinking spaces. So the psyche is created by us that yes, restaurants could be like this also. So let's start imagining spaces as a different ideology or a paradigm. So that's probably our role in general. When we start with any project, we feel that what is it that we could probably, with our limited resources or the power that we have at this point of time, do an impact in whatever small or large way possible. So it could be a very small intervention that yes, things could fly in air, so you get very happy that the horse is in the air. Or it could be a very larger impact that probably people demand more experience-based spaces than more functional-based spaces. So the experience is more important than the food. So that's like a major paradigm shift what's going on in public projects. In India, it's mostly restaurant because public spaces are not designed or it's not of commercial value. So a lot of money is invested in restaurants because they are public spaces.
You know, that actually brings a very interesting point, because as purists of architecture, we consider flying objects going up and down as something which is not architecture. We have kind of this sense of segregating a space, or in the theory of practice of how we learned, light and shadow, climate, various other factors that form permanent architecture, and then you insert these events into this entire thing, these predefined events. I mean, going from there into creating of a movie for Vishal, where you have a bound script sometimes, you have a given narrative, you're working on a project like Bajirao Mastani, or you're doing Ram Leela, where you've got a certain storyline, you've got a lot of thought, there are a lot of people involved in making that movie, a complex process. In that, to weave in as your idea of creating a certain kind of a space which is going to hit the psyche of the people watching that movie in that 3 hours, you have to be very calculative in creating that entire space or a set. And that also impacts. And that, to me, amongst all the design practices and all the architecture, has an immediate impact on the user. A movie has, no matter how much we deny it, today movie hits the subconscious mind of every person who watches it much faster than any kind of pure architecture, which has a lot of subtlety in understanding it. To understand a narrative takes time for masses. I'm not talking about designers here, I'm talking about the masses here. Whereas a movie places markers in a very particular exact moments in that timeline to formulate a certain psyche. I would like you to elaborate on that.
So I'd like to say the first thing, like when you're talking about masses, now filmmaking is something which is obviously very popular in all over, and you are talking about masses. Just to tell you that the design of a theater itself is so democratic, one black box where you have anyone and everyone who can look at the same content and laugh at the same joke, cry at the same emotion, and feel that togetherness. So that is what probably is hitting people in terms of filmmaking. About making of the film in terms of spaces, for example, a film like Bajirao Mastani, which is talking about a certain period, a certain era, which some of us might have studied, some of us are aware of it, some of us have read about it, but a common man doesn't have any idea about it. So what we do is we plant certain markers which actually represent the time, starting from architecture. It goes across to the costumes, it goes across to each and every detail of the character, the language, the way they speak. If you notice the way the characters were speaking in the film, and obviously the format itself. how to capture it, the grandness and the scale of what we are trying to represent. Since we're talking about a Peshwa who has got a larger-than-life character, the way we perceived space and the way you, I think, while you're designing perceived space, I'm not actively doing anything of that sort, but I'm sure you have visions of, from this corner, I can look at this window and I can see beyond it and what I see. So it's the same mannerism. We break down the script into spaces which eventually reflect that on the screen through the help of cinematographer. Over here is a collaborative art form, so everyone has to be in the same page. There's intense sessions of sort of discussions and coming down to that point where we can actually go and shoot that. A lot of different ways to reach there. Right now, the way we see it, SketchUp, all the 3D tools, they've become so participant in the filmmaking process that a film like Bahubali wouldn't have been possible if it was not, there was no 3D software available, because they've actually broken down everything before they went on the shoot. If you go on a set of Bahubali or certain films, you will just see 2 columns and a wall and a facade, and rest of all, everything is green. It's our imaginative space, which you are actually adding on the end. So it's as imaginative as you are sitting on a table and you're designing a project, you know, like starting from the scratch. You're imagining there's a piece of land which you got as a plot and you have to design a house on it. So you say, okay, where do I start with? So it's as imaginative and as initial as that in terms of filmmaking.
Nice. So we've actually kind of forming a certain open discussion, which I'll throw it open to all 5 of you. So there is an aspect of subtlety in space making, which may or may not be perceived by a general user in terms of what you're trying to convey. You've got a set of principles that you design with, which an architecture school tells you through series of 5 years, through various courses, breaking down from climate to psychology to philosophy and history and everything, where you build this narrative over a period of time to somebody who creates an out-and-out, absolute, pre-planned, pre-decided psyche to hit that mass in that short span of time. You know, because that needs to be done by the end of the day. If you don't hit it in a restaurant where somebody's spending 2 hours over a dinner, or you don't hit it in a movie, which is pretty much just maximum 3 hours, you've kind of missed the point. So let's open it out now and make it, there's no right or wrong here. There are just questions. What forms the psyche? Anybody who wants to take it on?
I'll just like to add on to one thing that I'm not an expert on psychology, but since there were some things about home or dwelling, in fact, when Heidegger, for example, talks of being and dwelling, he talks of how the human mind or the psyche has this innate desire to dwell not only in space but in time. And I do feel that this on one hand, this desire to anchor oneself in space and time, in relation to wanting to take excursions, where you expose yourself to differences, say like in a movie. And both of these are required, or every human being desires both of these. But what comes across to me when I hear everyone talking is, I really wonder whether the home now is the site of dwelling or of coming back to the self. Because everyone is demanding that the home be something which is maybe a piece of Greece that they saw, or a piece of movie set that they saw. And so the psyche of, or not the psyche, but how the human being receives space and what they feel when they are in space is something that I'm not sure whether it is the same as probably what it was 2 decades before. And so the architectural profession also needs to now think about how do you deal with this? How do you deal with different people imagining or wanting different things out of space?
So I'd like to intervene. Basically, there are 2 kinds of emotions that we are trying to hit. One is odd and wow and something that you'll remember forever. And one is something which is calming and you'll forget that, yes, I am at home and I'll forget everything else. Same goes for a movie, same goes for a restaurant, same goes for a monument. I mean, you could actually forget yourself in a monument or you could be really awed by it. So both the expressions, if achieved right, works. So either you remember a space forever or you remember the feeling forever. So either which of the two. So there could be a restaurant in which you just don't feel there is something happening. It's like you're home and you just order some food and you're eating. So again, you remember a feeling of coming back home, what you're telling. Or even a movie in which you can actually relate to a certain aspect of a movie, which is just character and emotions. Or it could be something like Bahubali, which you remember for the enormity of the set. So both ways it works. It works for different people, different times. But if achieved right, I think so these two extremes are the right zone.
Okay, actually, I differ a bit in that. See, when we go to restaurant, we don't expect home-like experience there. You may like a food which is kind of chapati. When you become homesick, you go to Singapore, you search for Indian food there. But then, whenever I go to Bali and we go to some resort and there is a bench, we say, wow, what an environment, what an interior. So if you keep that bench in your sofa, in your living room, it's so uncomfortable. You cannot sit more than 5 minutes on that, you know. It's a wooden bench. It's good in that environment because you are going to stay there for only 2 nights, okay, 2 days, 2 nights. So it's good. In the restaurant also, it is not really comfortable. It is something which is, you can't see what you are eating. It's that dim. So the environment, the space, the requirement is something totally different. It is like in festive season, you want to wear something different. You want to eat something different at your home. You cannot every day eat puran puli at your house.
I think we are going off the topic, Vivek, here. We are talking about psyches of space. And
I'm giving the example. Psyche of the space, it differs when the requirement differs. If you are in the resort, it is different. You cannot relate resort and your residence. You cannot resort restaurant and your dining room.
Okay, so you are saying, Shantanu, I would like you to elaborate on this. You cannot mix these two things together when you say there is a clear segregation in terms of space making. Like an institution has to be an institution, it cannot become something else, or an exhibition has to create that sudden spurt?
This is another thing that is, it's a big question and it's a challenge. Even when we look at it theoretically, you start realizing that most of these institutions themselves are transforming. They themselves have started realizing, and this is the cultural or the political environment I mean, we are a country that has been liberalized, and institutions themselves are not hermetic anymore. And when we start looking at them, we've started opening them up in very different ways, whether for debate, etc., rather than them being these hermetic units where had a gate and a sentry and gate point. So once these borders have been dissolved, already the question of new ideas which transform these institutions have started to take place. But the point it's reached in this discussion is where you can moderate this, because I think it's also reached a state of schizophrenia, where you don't know where you are, you don't know what you consume, you don't know how to behave sometimes, and you don't know what the protocol is. So we tend to lose sense of where we are. And we do it in our projects to get a spatial release, sort of experiment with space. But when you start doing it with our psyche to this extent, there is a state of schizophrenia, like Memento, where you need to write down where you are on your own body to come back.
You brought a very important point, schizophrenia, and more visual keeps happening. We create more and more of that schizophrenia where the sense of belonging to that space
just one more thing that I want to add to this. In practice, what's happening, and I mean, we've worked with one developer project. It turned out quite all right. But, so the master planner was from London, and it was a Malaysian London practice. We did the concept design till design development. Somebody else did obviously the approval drawings, but the engineering drawings also. It's delivered quite well. It's a very reputed developer. But really to work like that for us, where we are so engaged in start from meeting the client to delivery of the project, when you have to give up or take something that somebody, and being very conscious to be responsible to the master planner and then deliver it to somebody else who has to make the engineering drawings and then deliver it to site. You don't know how it works. You're very always so scared what will happen to this project. It turned out well because the client kind of managed it very well. But we are used to seeing projects from thought to building and engagement, and then also go and see it back saying that. But here, if you start working in this manner with the way the developer cuts you off at points, you start getting very, very sort of unsure about how this process works. So there's a schizophrenia in practice also, that how practice is being...
But doesn't that mean that we architects are very territorial that way, in that sense that we just want to hold on to that? I mean, we really, there is something that we've learned, and we've got this hangover of so many years of our understanding of academics, our study, where we come from, and we really want to hold on to that and not want to give up that entire territorial sense of how we want to take the practice or how we want to do the design. We want to be that purist that, okay, there is a sanctity to the master plan, there is a sanctity to a certain space. Where is, and we know how things are moving today with so much of bombardment of visual images in social media. I mean, most of us are hooked onto our mobile phones looking at all kinds of images in the world. And that is getting into the subconscious mind somewhere or the other. To question there, to say that it is wrong or it is not the right, or it is not architecture when it goes into schizophrenia, probably that's the future, isn't it?
No, I think we have to learn to manage this condition, because even schizophrenia in its condition as a disease is managed only. You're not able to solve it even today. It is still managed. So I think we need to manage the condition in such a way that people don't become schizophrenic. You know, we need to still give them the hyperactive space that somebody wanted. Somebody wants a space that is so hyper that I want that rush now. You know, when I have 2 hours and I want to get that rush and get out of that space. But how do I come back to the space that I should be in and calm me down? I think we need to figure these things out, because I don't think there's enough research done to what happens to you when you come out of that hyperactive space, and what do you do to a person? You need to bring him down in the right manner, right? The step down of a medication is also to be thought about. How do you step a patient down? So I think these things are not being studied. We are responding to markets. We are responding to client conditions. Not that we are not. We are also doing that. But we've not really questioned it so much to know what's going on to the clientele.
What is wrong in responding to the market and to the client, somebody who's putting in money? I mean, you're making a movie, you're spending crores of rupees on it. If you don't understand the market, if you're doing a restaurant, you don't understand the market, how the money is going to be spent into it. We are trying to hold on to a certain belief system out here. How correct are we in that direction?
So there is no formula for it, right? When you start making anything, when you start designing or you start creating something, you don't know what the end result is going to be. So you rely on your instinct and you do that. And whatever outcome comes on that day, in case of film, it's a box office, and if it's a hit, it's a hit. If people would like it, then you like it. If people whom house you are making or public spaces you are making, if they're whom you're actually directing to live a lifestyle in a certain manner, if I would say, if they like it, then it's a hit for you. If they don't, if they crib and complain, too bad.
I actually had a brief from the client that for 5 minutes, forget you are an architect. Imagine you are a user. Now start responding towards it. So a lot of times, I think so we're too much into our past and our experience and our knowledge. At times, if you forget everything and you just imagine from a user's perspective, not even a client's perspective, a user's perspective, and you start doing things DIY, and then things completely change, because your conformist notions of this is how things are supposed to be are completely changing, because it's not that this is the way I imagine because of my past experience and apprentice. If my background was something else, probably spaces for me would be something else. I mean, it may be good or bad. It's a very relative kind of a terminology.
Okay, see, if you can break the notions to a certain extent, that is creative. If you read a book, Future Shock by Alvin Toffler, he says, you know what future is. You see that in futuristic movies, in science fictions. you cannot give that kind of shock to the users. You have to add a bit so that they can digest it at a time. And a right balance gives the right space.
But are we saying that architects design for themselves or the masses? I mean, we are designing for people, right? By the end of the
Exactly,
day,
for
it is
people.
not our mind. It's we're following a brief.
No, you
We are
want to
interpreting.
give them
So
something
so
new,
we
right?
become so possessive about what we want to do that we forget whom we are designing for by the end of the day.
We have to impact people. I started this thing with basics, that the psyche of the user, not the psyche of the architect, not the psyche of the client.
But at the same time, we're trying to defend the fact that we architects create a certain space which is to be accepted by a user. Why doesn't it start on the other way around?
Yeah, but I would just like to add there that when I look at architectural education, it lays so much stress on being imaginative, innovative, and unique, and the designer as an individual. There's a lot of group work done in educational institutes, but typically it is site studies or it is initial thoughts and brainstorming. Whereas when it comes to designing or when it comes to the final design, there's a huge thrust on it being a representation of yourself. And in that sense, it's unfortunate that the education is teaching you that design is a product of your mind. And even a simple thing like group design or participatory design processes are treated as one-off design studios. So right from design education, we are thrusting this in the mind of the architect that they are an artist. I should not say artist, but they are designers who should create something unique. And in fact, that is why I see also that a lot of architects shy away from projects like mass housing, because they don't see the value of that individual designed object. And I think it takes a lot of time to uncondition the mind. Once
Then
you're-
isn't it important that the psyche of an architect needs to dissolve and become more in tune with, like, how many of us are actually giving social presentations and not a jury to 5 architects? Most of us end up giving juries to 5 architects and feel very happy with the crits that we get. How many of us actually present to 500 people who are actually going to be using that project and face all those questions that are going to come which are not related to architecture at all? Shantanu?
Just one small point. But I think that is where the dilemma is, that architecture is also seen as a profession. So when a doctor is treating a patient, you don't say that, oh, it's the patient, let them decide what kind of medicine they would want.
Medicine is a very technical subject when it comes down to, there is less of, I mean, there is intuition there.
Yeah.
Here you're relying a lot on intuition out here. On psyche, again I come back to, I mean, a doctor has to cut. He knows exactly what he needs to do, where it needs to cure and how he needs to cure. There are predefined parameters there.
I think if you talk to a lot of doctors, they're not sure. I mean, good doctors, I'm saying that diagnosis, in fact, is a very critical aspect of before prescription. I'm just saying that the dilemma in architectural education is that if you're treating it as professional education, you're saying that the architect is a professional. And therefore, by the very definition, knows something which the client or the user does not know. And that is where the dilemma of architectural education lies.
Okay, could I just intervene? So there's a difference. I am probably equipped with a set of skill set to deliver something, which probably XYZ is not. But imagination is not a skill set. It could be with everyone. So if I first separate these two aspects, that I can dream like anyone, but I can build like an architect, probably the output would be more fruitful. So, and in terms of education, I mean, that's what I have gone through my education. It's nothing to do with anything practical. It was just training you to have new dreams. And then you have the skill set. Over time, you'll acquire it because the world will actually make you understand HVAC, lighting, plumbing, everything. But then probably you get so boggled down with the skill set that you feel that that is the final product. So both of them are two different aspects. You can dream like a child and build like an architect. So probably that's a better, I don't know good or bad, but it gives a better output.
I have done few presentations where more than 800 people were present, and I was giving them on their project, the housing project, affordable housing project, but in the posh locality of Mumbai. Now I am going to give presentation next week to 10,000 people in Worli, and I'm already getting nightmares. So the kind of question they ask, they are not relevant. They don't exactly understand spaces, okay? And particularly when it comes to affordable housing, we are not like Dubai, where they design a form and then inject spaces. You have to think of so many other aspects. We actually really go into natural ventilation, cross ventilation, light, everything, right? So we try to explain them, but the only thing they care is the carpet area. What is the
But does that actually translate? I mean, we keep talking about these aspects and we use all these parameters to design. Is it actually perceived by people who are using those spaces? Have you checked? I mean, are there any proper checks that have been done by any of you architects
People
where
come
you
to
have
us-
actually seen that this is the translation of my idea and the person is actually understanding it that way? I mean, I'll come back to Shantanu on this and you need to elaborate. You're skipping.
Okay, so I think this is a project you've seen in images. It's the School of Planning and Architecture hostels. Again, it's designed with the intention of spaces that you can't imagine. Okay, you know about this project. So it is computer generated. It is simulated through software, and it has conditions that you could never imagine. That means if the building has 24 courtyards, not one elevation of that courtyard will be the same. But all the elements, all the room sizes, all the corridors are the same size. Yeah, so you can imagine a building that everything, every element of that building is the same, but not one space or one elevation of the building looks the same. Yeah, so this can be done only with the tools we have, and this is being done in a very sophisticated way with these computers. So, but what we're trying to get at is these spaces that we could not imagine and how they're being used now are fantastic. You did not imagine that there is this labyrinth of spaces that you could capture people looking through, which sometimes you as an architect can never imagine. Because I think cognitively we are not so evolved to capture those spaces in our head. You start seeing these levels of communications were so high compared to what we could have imagined. Because if you look at these 24 courtyards, you start looking at them as boxes, but they're actually very free to communicate in. So we are reaching a state where we can use the computer in the beginning and not know where we are hitting at, but you have to have the basic principles of architecture working, which you know how to use and you've been trained for that in schools. But then post-rationalize and see what more these spaces can do, which is only through use. And of course, they're all students of architecture, so they use spaces more creatively than we can imagine. And it is important to see them that you didn't really imagine how they you would ever imagine those spaces to be used. So it is happening, and it needs a whole new study, as well as how do you bring back that into architecture, you know? That this is working and we didn't know about these kind of spaces being available to us before.
Yeah. So in the same line of thought, as architects, individual designers, and everyone, filmmakers, our set of tools that we are using now, be it virtual reality, be it 3D imagining softwares, are they limiting us in a certain way, or are they enhancing our psyche or a way of thinking and way of moving ahead? Because 20 years back, it was not there. How were people thinking at that point of time? What were their thoughts and how
I mean,
were they
if you
translating
look
their
at movies,
ideas?
Gurudutt movies, or if
Absolutely.
you look at those,
So
I mean, there were
certain
no
movies
computers.
wouldn't have been possible if certain tools were not developed, you know. I don't know how many people would have watched a film called Blade Runner, which came in 1982. Yeah, it was made with miniatures. There were actually life-size miniatures, and they had created a certain time which he wanted to represent. So, which has now changed. It's a back of a hand. I can just make a 3D model, and I can put a camera and I can render it, and now I have that space. So these tools are obviously playing a larger role in our development as individuals, as users, also as designers. And the challenge is the bridge, the gap between the end user and the designer is getting smaller and smaller. A lot of people are savvy with so many tools that are out there, you don't know, or the kind of information they can get. I'm sure everyone has a certain exposure to certain clients who said, I want this, it's from that project or this project.
So you're saying it's going vice versa. I mean, it's the mass that is actually teaching us to now design rather than the other way around, or we kind of influencing subtly or subconsciously in a way that we may like to hold on to our beliefs and principles, but somewhere it's kind of melting away and we are going and understanding what a general psyche of understanding in the public realm is. Are we talking about that? Or are we still
Probably
holding on?
the mass is more exposed and they have now more resources to understand what they want. So if client comes to us, they'll say, this is what we want. But it's our role to navigate him through on the right path. So mass will definitely ask you that this is what I want and I'm very clear in my head that this is what I want to build. But as probably with the skill sets that you acquired and your understanding of probably this is not what he wanted, but he meant this. So it's always like a negotiation between, so there's a client, there's an end user, and there's us. So it's a negotiation between all three of us together to reach to the final product, which could not be a product of anyone's ego. So it has to be a barter of our ideas with their ideas with someone else's idea. Plus maybe a technical guy's idea, maybe HVAC, maybe plumbing. They're also equally important as everything else.
Manish, I think one important thing is that it's always when we think about a client, when we are in presence of a client, we did he's the guy who pays my fees. I've got to deliver to him. That's fine. But when you step aside, when you go back to your office or when you go back to school, you need to think that there are so many projects we've done which are unsolicited. These projects have no client, they have no patron, and we've drawn those projects because we believe this will generate a discussion on architecture that is important to pursue. And if you look at so many practices, I'll name the most iconic one, which is Zaha Hadid. She was just drawing and drawing and drawing. Those are paintings and drawings and tropes. Till the computers came to set her free, she couldn't build those projects. So I'm saying that we have to engage ourselves in practice that is beyond the client, because the client is important because he is a patron of that project and you get to build that project. But before that, you need to invest in the idea of architecture. And that's so important because without that, you'll be only delivering to the client who believes he's right. And I don't think we are right or the client is right all the time, and we don't have to take that position. But we need to step back and take positions which are varied and diverse, which will aid that sort of process when the client comes to you. So you can, because most of the one is the unsolicited projects and the projects that we solicit where there is no client, which is a competition. And this is the opportunity that you can question the brief from the beginning to the end and tell the client, and the clients have changed their briefs, which is really, really satisfying because they realize that this is an error in writing of the brief. So I'm saying to question the client is important, but to do that, you need to really, really invest in that sort of practice. I think, we need to bring that, otherwise we'll always be client delivery people, which is a scary situation to be in.
It's funny how we keep talking about that we are part of it, but we keep referring to it as architects versus masses. I mean, throughout our discussion, we've used the term, we are mass ourselves, we are part of that. We just trained 5 or 6 years in a certain profession with a set of tools and skills in an education system. We do not become a separate entity on this earth, on this planet. We are pretty much the mass itself. Our psyches are formed pretty much by what we grew up as. If, I grew up as a South Delhi boy, or somebody grew up in Jamshedpur or X place or Y's place, there is a certain experience. It does not go away the moment you become an architect. Those influences will remain and always remain in the DNA. So to say that we are designing for the masses, I think that is the place we've already made that segregation. And for the time that we keep making that segregation, we stand on the other side of it. How do we expect ourselves to really understand the psyche of the people that we're designing for? Anybody? So I think our time's up. And I think it was a great discussion. It felt like sitting at the CEFT canteen and over chai and discussing these things, and endless discussions. Of course, we didn't have 1 hour that time. I'll open the forum to the audience for any wild bullet missile questions that need to be thrown to any of these guys. Of course, I am in a different position. So Any questions?
But do we ever analyze the psyche of the space that we create? I mean, is it a happy space? Is it a sad space? What is the objective of that?
Are you directing this question to somebody or it's open?
Everybody.
Okay. Anybody?
I think post-occupancy evaluation is something which is not practiced very much in the Indian context. But at the same time, I'm reminded, I don't know in which book I read this, but I think it's a conversation between John Griffin and the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, where they were passing through these beautiful woods somewhere in Europe, and Griffin was very happy, but Rilke was very sad. That was because he felt that all this is temporal and is going to get destroyed. The point I'm making is that psyche is such a finely nuanced thing that personally I'm not sure whether we can say that this space can make people happy. A lot has to do with where the person is coming from and what memories does that person associate, not only with the built elements, but maybe the quality of light or the humidity in the air. And so I presume it's a very difficult thing to analyze psyche of
How do
space.
you perceive a public space? I mean, there is a perception of a public space as an equalizer, and that's how I think that you leave your social status, you leave your homes, you leave your comfort, and you come to a public space where whichever strata that you could belong to, it's an equalizing space. So do you perceive that space as a happy space where everybody is now on a common ground and thinking at least in that particular narrative that an architect has created?
Well, I don't know. Personally, I think that most public spaces, although people say that they are great equalizers, I'm not sure whether it's true for all segments or sections of society. And even though they might be free to behave the way they want in that space, probably the way they look at it or the way they perceive it might be very different. Like you yourself said, for someone it might mean freedom from home, but for someone else that space might mean a home for the homeless person. So that same public space could mean very differently in terms of what it does to your mind.
I mean, they're
when
pretty
you're in
much
that space.
mirrors of your state of mind. Whatever state of mind you walk into a public space, you end up actually getting that reflection back onto you. I mean, you're sad, you'll perceive it sadly. You're happy, you'll perceive it happily. There are moments that you build in public spaces. So to define or to say that a public space is created for a certain psychological fervor, it's incorrect. And it's too much to expect from somebody to say that create a public space which is a happy space. I don't know.
Not as a happy or sad space. I meant equalizer.
Any kind of
In the sense
emotional-
that it's common to everybody.
It's a neutral
And any
ground.
Common space is a neutral ground.
It's a
perhaps.
neutral ground.
Mr. Manish, due to paucity of time, we'll take that as the last question. Sure. Would that be okay?
I want to add what Sir says, that yes, it's a neutral ground, but certain perspective can be added by all architects collectively, like City Beautiful movements in the architects did in America. Same way. Should I repeat?
Yeah, what's your question?
My question is, I'm adding the point that Sir says collectively we can put certain elements in architecture, like City Beautiful movement done by architects in America. So collectively we can improve the space, the mind side, the psychology in public space through that.
Yeah, psyche of a space is a resultant of not just an architect's mind, it is every stakeholder involved into creating of that space. I think we've established that pretty much out here. So, all right.
I think
Okay.
that is the fifth stage of appreciation.
I think we'll take that last question there from that gentleman, and we'll
Thank
wrap
you,
it up
sir.
after this.
So being a very young architect right now, I was very curious about the discussion. So I would like to ask this as an advice from Shantanu sir. So since there was a discussion on schizophrenia and where there's a program and you start to, where the program kind of gets blur and so there was a talk about how there's a conventional restaurant, there's a conventional, so there's a preconceived notion that people have. And you raised a point where you said that you shouldn't blur the line so much that the people start getting schizophrenic about it. So what if there's a conventional problem that's going on from ages, and you personally feel that this is the right solution to it, and which is very unconventional? How do you convince a client that you don't need to get schizophrenic, but this is a better solution than what the conventional hospital or a bar or anything is?
Firstly, don't call me sir. I've not been knighted or anything, so sir is not a good idea. Shantanu is the name. But I think I don't really have an answer to what you're saying. But, like you mentioned, one building type, which is the hospital, and we do some healthcare work. And whether you like it or not, some portion of the hospital has started to become like a five-star hotel. There is a salon. If you went to Kokila Ben in Bombay, there is a hair salon there. There's a fine dine restaurant in the hospital. So these institutions themselves have started to change and transform. It's still a hospital. They do surgery there. Everything happens. But there are elements of other, like a hotel kind of space in that space, in that building type. So these hermetic institutions, the way we knew them, have started to change. And we as architects have to understand the change that is required in society. Well, everybody who comes to a hospital is actually not a patient, right? There is somebody, and somebody who's actually coming to a hospital is also recovering to become well. That person needs a haircut. They don't like the way they look. They were not well, they looked grubby, but they want that haircut before they leave the hospital.
Shantanu, I've actually heard of somebody proposing somebody in that fine dine restaurant in that hospital. There's an actual story of that.
And to the extent that the child who leaves that hospital gets a balloon, who can let that balloon go that I'm well now. So society, child psychology is involved in this, patient psychology is involved, the dignity of a patient is involved. They have 25 elevators in that building. You will never go into an elevator where there's a patient being carried, because patient's dignity is paramount in that hospital. So I'm saying, we are being conscious to what a patient's needs are, a child who's a patient's needs are, and I'm just talking about one building type, but every institution is going through this transformation of what are we today, where should we be tomorrow, and that's why we have to get involved in that discussion. And that's why I'm saying that I don't have an answer, but if you don't invest in unsolicited discussions of architecture, which are tropes and drawings, which generate further discussion, it'll always be, because the client knows only that much. There is a larger discussion than the client knows, and we need to get engaged in that discussion. Excellent. I hope I've answered your question.
Okay.
Great. I think that was a good discussion. We'll wrap up here. Shraddha's giving me dirty looks. So thank you, guys.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to request you all to please remain on the stage as well. And very interesting discussion. Lots of questions lined up even from our audience members, but I'm going to request you to please connect with our speakers offline. And I'd like to invite Mr. Samir Saxena from Legrand to please come forward to present the mementos to our speakers as well. May I please invite Mr. Samir Saxena? Firstly, to Mr. Vivek Bole. To Mr. Shantanu Poreri. To Mr. Vishwanath Kashikar. And to Mr. Abhigyan Yogi. Thank you very much, Mr. Samir. Thank you once again. May I please invite Mr. Mandeep Badwa from Seasons Furnishing to please come forward to also present the mementos. First up to Mr. Vishal Raman. And to our session moderator, Mr. Manish Gulati. Thank you once again.